It's value chain I hate.
I won't mention value chain. So there are two.
Okay, so Xavi, why do we need the EU ETS? What is the EU ETS? Why do we need it?
Well, the EU ETS we need it to address the issue of the climate change, no? The emissions for very energy intensive sectors, no? It was first set to the energy sector and later to some very energy intensive manufacturing activities, no? And since 2013, it applies also to aviation. No? The aviation is the most climate energy intensive mode, no? The main external cost of aviation is CO2 emissions, no? Or greenhouse emissions in general, no? Up to now, aviation represents around 3-6% of global emissions, no? But the main concern here is that the trend is that it's going to grow in the coming years, no? Because aviation has not stopped growing, no? And in the electricity sector has been a very technological innovations in terms of renewables and so on. No, there are also these of electric cars, and aviation is is a very hard sector. No, and with this concern involved that the European Union decided to include aviation in the ETS. No, and the ETS at practice it works like a tax. No, it's a more complicated thing, but it's like a tax. Finally, you have
it's not a tax, right? Because I understand this analogy, but it's something. I feel there's an important difference to a tax, which I feel is also very important for your research. So because with a tax, basically the price would not change. But if we look at the price for certificates, they are not the same. They change quite substantially over time, and this is. So, there is a price for emissions, but I think the point of the ETS is to price emissions, but I think it is to that the total emissions are kind of fixed, right? I think this is the important feature of the ETS.
Yes, so there are two things that in fact the system is becoming more stringent, no? Because one thing is that there are some free allowances, no? So the firms in this system, they have some allowances for free, and the others, they have to buy it in the market. There is also demand and supply system, no? And the prices change according to this, no? And then there is the total cap, no? And then what the European Union is doing is to make everything more stringent, no? Because they are going to phase out the free allowances, no? I think that it's from 2026. There will be no free allowances anymore.
Right.
And they have also, and there is this cap, but this cap has been reduced every year, no? So at the beginning the cap was 1%, 2%, and from 2026, I think it's 4%, no? So
let's talk about let's talk about the free allowances. So, we had also a previous podcast, and I think this is a very critical issue because a lot of people will be saying, you already mentioned it, aviation is part of the ETS since 2012, but they received a lot of free allowances, which means they received the permissions to emit greenhouse gases basically for free, right?
In 2012, yes, but from 2013,
it's decreasing. The number of these free allowances is decreasing. But I think something that I think is important to highlight is that that the total emissions do not only depend on the total number of certificates and not how they are allocated to the airlines, right? So in that sense, it means that even if we have, let's say we have, do you know how many certificates we have? I don't know.
Millions.
Okay, so a large number of certificates, and now let's assume that we give them all out for free. The climate goal will be, will be achieved anyway, whether we give them out for free or we sell them to all the companies who emit greenhouse gases, right?
Yeah, in fact, there are, so here there is the issue of the opportunity cost, no? So there are many people in the field of environmental economics says that what matters is the opportunity cost, and even with free allowances, there will be an effect, no? And in fact, there are some studies for the electricity sector, very influential studies for the electricity sector that says that even with free allowances, there is an effect, no?
Right. I think this is something that I always try to kind of highlight is that, you have a permission and you will be using and as long as you use the permission, it doesn't matter whether it has been given out for free or sold on the market so that someone else can use it. Right. I think this is in that sense, giving out the free allowances is sort of a way, I feel, of trying to manage the cost of the system to the companies without affecting achieving the climate goals, right? I mean, of course, if less free allowances would mean that you also reduce the number of certificates you give out, that would mean that the climate goals would be, perhaps it would be easier to, or let's say that would be a more ambitious policy. But these are two different things, right? The way the climate the achievement of the climate goals depends on the total number of certificates, and not so much on how they are allocated to the companies, whether meaning for free or if they have to buy it in this market. It's certificate market.
Yeah, but there is also the issue that at the end, the airlines, I don't know. Here there are many. So there are people in the field of environmental economics that say that it's better the tax than an ETS because it's simpler, no? Because I don't know.
I think I didn't understand. Could you just repeat what you just said?
So a tax is simpler, no? So it's easier for a firm, no? So I have to pay a tax, and then I pass the tax to the passengers or the consumers, no? And then you will have less demand, and then you will reduce everything, no? With the ETS, with this idea of the free allowances, the opportunity cost, real cost, and so on, everything becomes more complicated. And my feeling is that the airlines are not so sophisticated in their decision making, no? So they will reduce flights if they have more cost, no? And at the end, if you are increasing the cost, you will have a more clean effect on the market, because at the end, the airlines are able to purchase allowances to the other firms, no? In the electricity sector, especially, no, that there is an increasing weight of renewables. They can sell, no? And then airlines still can keep growing because the cap is for all the sectors in the system. And my feeling is that the real reaction of airlines has to do with higher costs, no? And higher costs.
Right. I mean, but I think now we are still more kind of, I feel this is an important discussion to basically set the scene. And now we have like a more general discussion about the EU ETS. And you mentioned the carbon tax. I think one of the important things to recognize is actually that we do not really have a carbon tax system, but we have emission trading schemes, right? I think this is, and I think the possibility of, for instance, giving out free allowances sort of helps implementing climate policies. Whereas it seems that carbon taxes are quite difficult to implement because basically...
At the national level, yes, impossible.
Right? I mean, this is, of course, we like economists, everyone would say, we would like to have a carbon tax. But on the other hand, we also know that one of the features of the ETS is fixing the greenhouse gas emissions means that the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions is basically fixed. So with a carbon tax, even if the carbon tax is quite high, there is a possibility that companies would emit a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and more than what you perhaps would have with a system that is basically eliminating
yes, because it combines population and pricing, no? At the end, yes, this is the advantage. But on the other, so this is the strong point of, so the two strong points are these, no? This combination of regulation and price system that finally you combine effectiveness and efficiency, no? And the other thing is it has to be applied by a multilateral organization. Is easier an ETS than a tax, no? On the other hand, it's a more complicated system, no?
And, what I would, now you already mentioned that aviation has been included in the ETS since 2012. Now, my question would be, what do you think? Was it good to add aviation to the emission trading scheme? What was the effect of adding aviation to the emission trading scheme? I mean, this is sort of your, I think this is where we get to more detail with your presentation, but with your presentation, because you brought a couple of slides, which we will be discussing very soon. But, why adding aviation to the emission trading scheme? What's the point?
The point is to contain the growth, no? The growth of the sector, no? At the end, so I think there are different ways as the ETS may work, no? To achieve the expected goals, no? First, you have that the airlines are going to have higher costs, and then these higher costs will translate to directly less supply, or there will be pass cost through to passengers, and finally, with the price demand elasticity, there will be a reduction of demand, no? At the end, you are containing the growth, no? It's not so stringent the system to really reduce in absolute terms the number of flights, but at least you are containing the growth, no? The other way as the ETS may work is they may provide incentives to use better planes, no? Because the newer planes are more fuel efficient. And it should be modest, this effect, but it's because finally the ETS implies an increase on the cost of fuel, no? In practice, is this, no? And then you have incentive to use more efficient planes, no? And the latter point, I think, is at the end is something that has an effect on the supply, no? On the supply side, no? So the airlines may have incentive to be more efficient in the sense to have higher load factors. And also it could be the case that they may have also incentive to use bigger planes, no, less frequencies and bigger planes that are also in terms of emissions per seat kilometer it's lower, no? So I think these are the expected effects of the ETS. And my research, what I have found is that so the empirics meets theory, no? So the results are. Then we can
I think
if the magnitude of the effects is very important or not. But it seems that it is happening what we were expected to happen, no?
Right. I mean, this is where we get much more details. I think your research has been extremely useful, and I know a lot of colleagues who are highly appreciating sort of the contributions that you have been doing to this area. And this is also why we are having this chat right now. Let me just add one more thing why I feel what's important to understand why it makes sense to add aviation and basically all the sectors of the economy to the emission trading schemes. And this is one important issue which has to do with basically the climate problem, which is the climate effect depends on the total CO2 emissions around the globe. And it doesn't matter where it comes from which country, from which industry, it all doesn't matter. It's the cumulative greenhouse gas emissions over time that matter for the climate impact. So if you want to have something effective, really what we want to have, actually what we would like to have, is a emission or a carbon tax or an emission trading scheme that would be global, right? Global, including all industries, all regions of the world. That would be the most effective and most efficient. But the problem is that, of course, it's very difficult to have everyone agree to such a system. And this is why some regions are, moving forward. And I think Europe is really, in terms of climate policies, for me, is like a global leader. And I would say that it's very clearly because, again, the source of the greenhouse gas emissions doesn't matter. And for that reason, all industries should be included in order to take advantage of this kind of emission trading scheme, which means that we want to achieve the goals, the climate goals, at the lowest cost. So wherever the costs are high, then fewer reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Wherever the abatement costs are low, then more. And the bigger the system is, the more efficient it can be, because there are more opportunities for these kind of trades, if you wish, right? I mean, this is, I feel...
But here I think there is the issue that I think we should ask for a greater effort to the richest places, no? Because really it's... so the United States and the European Economic Area represent around 45% of the global emissions on aviation, and they are just 12% of the population. You have, for example, India. India has similar levels of emissions that United Arab Emirates. I think the big effort the bigger effort must be on the side of Europe and US. And I think Europe is making this effort, and US it is not, no? And here is the thing of the CORSIA, no? The CORSIA, this carbon offset mechanism, no? That will be compulsory from 2027 on all international flights in the world, no? Let's see what happens with this, because if
companies join, it's voluntary, right? I mean, it's not. You can't impose it on a country that doesn't want to.
I think that if you are in the ICAO, in the International Civil Aviation Organization, I think it's compulsory. So at the end, let's see what is going to happen. Is someone, in theory, it's going to be compulsory. The question is what is going to be the price of the compensation mechanism, because the idea here is...
I looked at, actually, it's not so easy to find some information, but I looked it up. I think it could be around 50% of the current prices for emission certificates in the European emission trading scheme. So it's definitely lower, but still...
But it's something, no?
Yeah.
Because also this relates to the issue of because one of the debates about the ETS, no, in Europe, is that in principle it was expected that it was going to be a full scope, no? It was going to affect to all flights departing or arriving at an European airport, but with the pressure of US, China, and so on, it was finally restricted to the within European Economic Area, no? So within the European Economic Area, this represents around 8% of total emissions from aviation. If we were the full scope, it would be 25%, no? And here now there is the European Union. I think they are doing it quite well, because the idea is that they are going to revise what is happening with CORSIA, and if CORSIA they say that it's not going to be so stringent, then they are going to apply the ETS to flights departing from an European airport to a non-European airport. No? So the arriving
Which is currently not the case. Right?
It's currently not the case. Yes. They are going to expand the scope of the ETS. No?
It was the idea, actually, they wanted to do it from the beginning, but then there was some opposition from other countries or other regions, let's put it this way, and then it didn't happen.
Yes,
What's interesting is that the maritime sector has just been included into the EU emission trading scheme, and extra European voyages, so from European ports to non-European or vice versa ports, are included in the ETS, so to say. So there is, they sort of managed in the maritime sector. And in this sense, the aviation sector lags behind. But of course, aviation is included since 2012, and maritime was just added to the emission trading.
Well, here there was the negotiation with the use of CORSIA. No? The European Union accept to reduce the scope in exchange of CORSIA. No? Let's see what happens.
All right.
It's still soon, no? Because we cannot make really we can make some simulations, but there are some uncertainties what is going to happen with CORSIA, no? But
of course,
it's one of the hopes, no? Of the.
This is one of the issues, that it's a global scheme. And having a global approach is just making a lot of sense. This is what we need. Why? Because it's a global problem, right? So we need a global solution. It's as simple as that.
And I think it's logical that it should be more to have a system more stringent in Europe, no, within Europe and in US, no, and a system but less stringent in the rest of the places, no, at least in the lower income places, no. I think this is a good way to.
But you see, I think this is where I think a system, emission trading scheme, in a sense, can help, because again, if that's your goal. With an emission trading scheme, you can achieve it without sacrificing the climate goal. What you can do is, if you feel that some countries should have the sort of, if you wish, like privilege or the possibility to also emit a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, because historically, of course, Europe and the US are the main culprits for this. And you say, okay, other countries should also have the opportunity to grow and develop their economies, and that would be associated with greenhouse gas emissions. And then what you can do is basically you can have an emission trading scheme and give free allowances, right, to these countries. And that, I think, would be a very useful tool in order to sort of achieve the goals, and then have this kind of tuning the economic or the cost impact of the system depending on the region.
Yeah, in fact, in Asia, there are many places, no, that have started to implement, or they have plans to implement an ETS system with this idea that it's going to be weaker than the European Union. But up to now, it's less common to find examples of including aviation in these ETS. But
right,
there is a growing trend to use ETS in Asia, no?
I think the big hope is, of course, I mean, there is the China ETS, which is, in terms of emissions, as far as I understand, at least twice as large as the the European emission trading scheme. But aviation is not included.
No, in aviation, no. Overall, yes.
But it's not included. It's not included, and the prices are relatively low. But you see, I mean, the point is that. I think this is something that is it's great. I mean, I think Europe sort of sets a good example, and there are other big important regions that sort of also consider this a good approach, and moving in that direction. I think that is very positive.
Yeah, considering we're in a world of the second best, no? So the optimal solutions will never be applied in the real world, no? But in this world of the second best, I think we are progressing, no?
That's right. That we have to, because, yeah, it's just something that we have to solve. But I think I'm kind of hopeful that we will be able to manage and achieve and having a limited sort of damage to the.
No, and in this, I think one issue that is relevant in the aviation, so to highlight, no, in the aviation, it's a very hard abate sector, so it's complicated, no. The technological options are limited, no. So we are not going to have electric aircraft, no, at least in the next years, no? And the hydrogen is going to be also very limited to very short haul flights, and we will take some time. This synthetic biofuel also will take some time, no? So it has many limitations, no? And here we have this trade-off between economic growth and environment, no? So I think aviation is one of the sectors that it's more challenging to really address the climate change goals. Huh?
But I think one of the issues, this is again where the emission, one of the strengths of market mechanisms is, okay, it's a hard to abate sector. So what they can do is they can then they can not abate by buying certificates, and then, then they can emit greenhouse gas emissions. And by buying the certificates, they make sure that even though they do not abate, others will abate, and that so overall the climate goals will still be achieved, right? I think this is one of the features of these. This is why we as economists love these kind of market mechanisms, because there is this flexibility that it includes, right?
Yeah, it's
And
the
I think
efficiency, no? Because at the end, the firms can adapt or to pay, no? So.
And I think actually when I look at the results of your research, this is what I feel is the one of the important results of your research, that I feel you find a lot of evidence where that highlights this positive effect of market mechanism, which is the flexibility. So there are some, for them it's difficult to abate, so they don't abate. For some it's easier to abate, so they abate. And I think this is really what you're finding in your research. But let's have a I know that you brought some slides, and I know everyone will be is impatient seeing slides. So why don't you just share the slides and then we go over this, because I feel there are a lot of other things that also need some clarification when it comes to not just understanding how these market mechanisms for climate protection, the climate policies work, but also how to assess the impact of these policies. So I feel this is really something where your work has been making important contributions.
So what we can expect from the ETS, no? From the ETS applied to the aviation, we can expect some supply and demand effects, no? First, we can expect an increase of cost for airlines, no? And airlines, there are several studies that shows that in a context of imperfect competition, if there is a shift in the supply curve, no, there will be a reduction of supply, no. And another possible reaction of airlines to the increased cost, no, is to translate this higher cost to passengers, no, and this will lead to higher fares, no. And in practice, this will be the distributional effects will be relevant, but at the end, if there is directly less supply or you increase fares, and then there will be less demand, but less demand will lead to less supply. So at the end, we should expect the first effect that we should expect from aviation is less supply. Probably less supply will be linked to higher fares. No, overall, this less supply and higher fares should also lead to less demand. No,
right. I mean, this is like the equilibrium effect, right? What we're looking basically is demand, interaction between demand and supply, right? And there will be a new equilibrium, and likely this new equilibrium will involve like higher fares and basically less aviation traffic, right?
Yes, and depending on the pass goes through, no, it will affect more airlines or more to passengers, no. But this will be another question, eh?
Right?
And then we also expect, and there are some theoretical papers that provide evidence of this, no, that this, or in general, there is an increase in the fuel cost as it implies the ETS, no, the airlines can react in terms of improving the efficiency of their operations, no. First, as the costs are related with the supply, they may have incentive to increase the load factors. And on the other hand, they may have incentive to use bigger planes, no, because bigger planes have less emissions per kilometer. Right. Another possible effect of the ETS is the technology effects, no. So newer planes are more fuel efficient, no. So the Neo Max, no, this new generation of aircraft are between 15 to 20% more efficient than older versions, no. For giving an example, so there may be incentive for airlines to use planes that have less consume less fuel, because at the end the CO2 emissions is proportional to the consumption of fuel. No, so it's always a question of fuel.
I would like to add two things here to this, because I think this is a very important aspect that you also have looked at, and I would like to highlight. The first is that the incentives to improve technology is independent of whether the certificates have been allocated based on free allowances or not. And this is because airlines that got the allowances for free still they could sell the certificates on the market and could then earn the certificate price, the revenues from the certificate price. This is what you call like the opportunity cost, right?
Yes,
so
yes.
also here, those incentives are kind of independent of, whether these certificates have been bought in the market or allocated to the airlines via the free allowances.
Yes. It's like this.
Right? Yes. And there was a second effect, but I forgot. I will remember very soon. I'll get back to this.
Now, in this thing of the technological effects, we always have to take into account that the ETS or any policy measure may help to accelerate the process, because at the end, the airlines have incentive to use better planes, because, well, it's around 25-30% of their operation cost. So they have incentives in any case. So at the end,
right,
these measures provides an incentive to accelerate something that they want to do in any case.
Right. And this was actually my second point that I try to make, is that fuel makes around, did you mention it, like around 25, maybe 30% of the airline operating cost? It's very substantial. So even if we wouldn't have included aviation into the emission trading scheme, they would still have incentive to invest into more fuel efficient aircraft. But the point is, and that's something that you're doing in your study, is trying to find out how can we see what's the impact of EU ETS on top of the incentives that the airlines had already. And this is a very important technological issue, because in terms of a methodological challenge, because some people may be saying, oh, the EU ETS is so successful. Look at how the aircraft have become, how much more efficient the aircraft have become. And then it may be tempting to attribute everything to the emission trading scheme, but no, it's not. Even without the emission trading scheme, there would have been improvement. And I think this is the biggest challenge, to really identify the extra effect that the emission trading scheme created on top of the existing, already strong incentives to improve technology, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I agree.
I think this is really something that I would like to. I think our discussion here can contribute to this, because it's so tempting to make these kind of, see what we call like correlations. Oh, this is happening and this is happening, to say, oh, this is happening because of this. So
the causality is important. Yes, it's our job, to identify causality. Yes,
but it's not trivial. It's not trivial,
no.
And I feel that because it's not trivial, I think a lot of people struggle, and this is why I think this is where your research can make an important contribution, and also our discussion right now can make an important contribution to sort of convey to the broader audience how, what you can do in order to sort of identify these extra effects, so you can really see, okay, this is what the EU ETS did compared to what would have happened anyway.
Yes, I agree. So then the other effects that may have the ETS, and these are not so good, it's the issue of the carbon leakage. The carbon leakage is the idea that when there is some regulation in one jurisdiction, one place, this implies an increase of cost for firms, and this could imply a movement of production from the regulated place to the unregulated place. So far, the evidence about carbon leakage in the ETS in general, it's also, all the studies have focused on a period where there was less, the prices were lower, But there are not clear evidence of carbon leakage. But aviation it's a very international sector with the main asset is very mobile. And here there could be some effects of carbon leakage. No, there could be.
Yeah, I think this is also going back to my question in the very beginning, where I said, okay, what is the effect of adding aviation to the emission trading scheme? And it's not all positive, right? This is what you just said.
Yes.
On flights that are affected by the emission trading scheme but not covered by the emission trading scheme, there we could see that actually the effect could be negative in the sense that the greenhouse gas emissions could be increasing rather than reducing. And this is what you call here the leakage effect, right? Yes. I think that is something that I agree that for aviation, we don't know so much about it, although your research is contributing to, improving the understanding of this. But I think especially for aviation, I would agree this is an important factor.
Yeah, in fact, now I go to the slide 7.
Okay.
In the slide 7 here, there are two maps that illustrate the two potential carbon leakage effects. No, one is in terms of tourism. No, we could be that. Because the increase of cost in the tourist destinations in the ETS area, that people prefers to fly to another place. No, for example, instead of going to Greece, you are going to Turkey. For giving an example,
right?
This is one type of potential carbon leakage, no, and then there is the other one that is the hub carbon leakage, no. Here I put the example: if you want to go to I'm from Barcelona, no, and I want to go to Bangkok, no, and I have two options.
Which is where you live, in Barcelona. This is why it's not a surprise that you bring this up.
Yes.
I lived in Barcelona too, actually. It's a long time ago, in 1991, I lived in Barcelona.
I know. But then I can go to Bangkok and I can go through Dubai. Then here there is no any ETS effect, no? Or I can go through Frankfurt, Helsinki, or an European ETS airport, no? So in the short leg, there will be an effect of the ETS, no? We know that the ETS may have imply less frequencies that imply higher schedule delay costs, higher layover time costs, and so on, no? Or higher fares, no? And then it could be that given due to ETS, I prefer to fly through Dubai instead of flying through Helsinki or Frankfurt, no? And at the end, I still flying, no? I still flying and I still contributing to generate emissions, no? Or I'm helping the airline to generate emissions, no? So this is the other type of carbon leakage. So now, so we're expecting this. In theory, there are these potential effects of the ETS, no? And I summarize here some of the results that I have found, no? Here, the first paper that I think it was the first paper on the impact of the ETS on the first ex-post empirical econometric paper on the effect of the ETS on the aviation, no? It's a paper that the focus is on the total CO2 emissions. Well, here we have a sample that is all Europe, no? And we have the treated routes include flights within the European Economic Area, and the control routes are European routes that connect non-EEA airports.
So this is really the issue. The reason why you compare those is to identify what we just said in the very beginning, is to differentiate sort of the effect that airlines have anyway in terms of, for instance, improving fuel efficiency or reducing greenhouse greenhouse gas emissions. And then also the effect that the EU ETS had on top of this. And basically what you're doing is you're comparing intra-European flights with flights that are only partly European, sort of, right? That's the approach. And then you see one is affected by the EU ETS and the other is, or maybe one is affected only indirectly, right, through leakage to the EU ETS, whereas the other is not is affected by the EU ETS. And so by comparing the two markets, which have different, the EU ETS has different impacts on those markets, you can sort of identify that the difference the EU ETS makes.
Yes. In fact, in this we make some robust net checks to analyze this issue of the indirect effects, and we don't find evidence, because when we restrict the sample to routes within non-EEA airports, we find basically the same result. But it is an issue. The indirect effects are an issue. And then this is the kind of diff analysis, no? The diff analysis that you have some period before.
Diff meaning difference in difference, right? So you basically look over time, and there is a difference over time. So you have a difference in the fuel, let's say in the greenhouse gas emissions, over time in one market, let's say involving somehow non-European destinations or origins, and also a difference over time within European markets that are covered by the EU ETS, and the difference between those differences. This is sort of what helps us understand the emission trading scheme.
Yes.
Right? This is actually, I always have to remind myself about, these, because it's not trivial. It's really not trivial. So this is why I feel that it's especially for the audience, or for someone who is not necessarily trained in economic or econometric methods, this is quite a tough task, sort of to understand. But I hope that with this discussion, we sort of can make a contribution in sort of also conveying the mechanisms or the ideas behind those approaches.
Yes, and here one of the issues, that one of potential concerns, is that the idea is that really the European economic, the European Union countries are comparable to non-European Union countries. No, this is one issue that deserves some attention. No? And here we apply a methodology that is entropy balance. No, that we don't need to enter in the details, but just to say that at the beginning we create a sample where the routes affected by ETS and the routes not affected by ETS are exactly equal in terms of population, income, and intensity of competition, and so on. No, the idea is to have a very comparable sample at the beginning, no, and then we run the analysis. No,
this is basically what you are saying, is that if you compare the routes that are within Europe and then that involve part of extra-European routes, then the question is, are they comparable at all, right? Because you compare them and you sort of try to take this into account by just adjusting the methodology so that you compare things that, according to, the best standards that you can apply, are reasonably comparable in a sense. I think this is perhaps a cautious way of putting it.
Yes, that's the idea, yes. And then we apply the analysis to different samples, no? All sample, short-haul flights, network airlines, and low-cost airlines. No? An important thing here also, that the period that we consider here is 2010-2016. That is a period where the prices of allowances were low. So
of the certificates, you mean, right? Of the emission certificates,
the prices were, I think.
Do you know how high have they been at this time?
Sorry.
Do you know how high have they been at this time? Right now they can be between, let's say, 80 or.
Less than 10 euros per ton of CO2. So we are talking about...
And now it's like 80 to 100, or even like 100. There was time where it's 100. So, so true. It was quite low at the time.
Yes, in fact, when if I go to the results, no, we see an effect for the whole sample, no. So the routes affected by the ETS have 5% less emissions than, or have increased less in less than 5% emissions compared to routes not affected by the ETS. The effect is stronger when we are dealing with short-haul routes that could also be affected by intermodal competition, and the intensity of emissions is higher. And also the effect is stronger or really significant for low-cost airlines and not for network airlines. No? For network airlines, finally, they are exploiting connecting passengers, and probably we should only have an effect on network airlines if the prices of the CO2 are higher. No, in this case, for this period, we don't have an effect.
And I think now it may be tempting, sort of, or one way of looking at this is to say, oh, for low-cost carrier, the ETS system works, and for network carrier, perhaps not. But that would not how actually personally, that's my own opinion. I would be interpreting the results, right? I would say this is really the strength of market mechanisms, that it allows for this kind of flexibility. So what it seems that low-cost carriers have relatively low costs of low abatement costs when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, where for network carriers they are high. And so this is the emission trading scheme, without sacrificing on achieving the climate goals, allows for this kind of flexibility. And this is why we like market mechanisms, right? I mean, do you agree with this interpretation?
I agree. The only thing is that I will show you later some results that in more recent years, the network airlines are affected by ETS. So in this period that the prices are low, I agree with you, with the flexibility that some airlines react more than the others, because they are more sensible to cost and so on. But later on, the network airlines are also affected by the ETS. And later I will show you a figure that provides evidence on this.
Okay.
And what we found here is that the main channel are less flights, So the effect of the use of better aircraft has some effect, but it's more modest, And later, could also be related here. There are two things, One, that the prices were low, and the new aircraft, the new generation aircraft, the Neo and Max start to operate later in the market. There are other papers that provide similar results to ours. Mm-hmm. And then the issue of always with this kind of the causality, the main assumption of the diff in diff is the parallel trends. The idea is that before the system or the policies apply, we should find similar trends for observations affected and not affected by the measure. And we have here that we are before the here we put the treatment year, the 2013. We make also some robustness checks if the treatment year is 2012 or 2013. In 2012, there were a lot of uncertainty. There was not clear if the policy was being applied or not. Finally, all allowances were for free. But this could be debatable, but when we look at this, we don't find a significant relevance or significant difference if we consider the treatment year 2012 or 2013. But we have these parallel trends, and when we look at the full sample or the low-cost carrier sample, it's quite clear, It's quite clean, the effect arises from 2013,
Right.
And then the other expected effect of the ETS is the change of the improvement in the technology, in the use of better aircraft, And then we have another paper that with the same sample, but here it's a longer period, It's 2010, 2021. Okay. And here what we look is not at the total emissions, but we focus on the emissions intensity. And emissions intensity, I mean emissions per seat kilometer. And we also look at the aircraft choice and the issue of the winglets, or the winglets or sharklets, That is the curved tips.
Fancy looking wing and tips.
In the name of the wings, that's something that allows to reduce CO2 emissions, should be about 5% or something like this. The winglets are also good in terms of reducing noise. Noise and even NOx, and the winglets, the issue of the winglets is that the changes in the aircraft, it's costly, So you are only going to retire, to make an early retirement of an aircraft that it's close to its final useful life, So you are not going to to change an aircraft that it's, I don't know, 10 years, that you have it from 10 years or something like this, no? So we could expect an effect, but a modest effect in terms of acceleration. If you have an aircraft that is expected to have it in your fleet for 25 years, but you will have it 22 years, no? It should be something like this, no? But the winglets have the advantage is that you have your aircraft and you just have to make the installation, no? And it's relatively cheap, eh? So winglets, it's less than 1 million euros, eh? So,
it's peanuts.
For an airline, it's not so much, no?
Yeah, I mean, considering the cost of an aircraft, which can be, I don't know, $100 million, $200 million. So 1 million is still, at least for us, I think a very substantial amount. But as you mentioned, compared to, the cost of a new and more efficient aircraft, upgrading in terms of winglets is definitely economic.
It's a bit off, no? Because you are going to save fuel, no? And the ETS can help to have additional savings, but yes, it has a cost, no? This trade-off, no?
Right.
Well, and here the analysis is it's the same idea, no? The same treated routes and the same control routes, but here we apply a synthetic diff in diff. That it's a refinement of the classical diff in diff that makes that it allows you to have a comparable samples in terms of covariates, no? But also it allows it to optimize pretrends, no?
It's kind of very similar to the other approach. It's just that you're trying to ensure the comparability of what you are comparing in different ways, in a sense. But the idea and the logic is pretty much the same.
And the synthetic diff in diff, what it does is to build an artificial control group, no? An artificial control group that is going to be equal to the treated group, no?
Yeah.
In terms of the variables that control variables. Now here we make the distinction between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, no, to refine the comparability. Because what we look at, what we find is that, and I think this is an insight of the paper, no, we see that in Western Europe, basically we are comparing of the countries of the European Union of 15 countries, no, before the enlargement to the Eastern Europe, no, with Switzerland, because Switzerland is not in the European Economic Area, no, and Switzerland was not in the ETS until 2020. And then we have the Eastern Europe, no, that we are going to compare, Turkey with Poland, no, and here what we look, I think something that was interesting is that the Switzerland was Switzerland and the Western Europe, no, were really very similar in terms of the aircraft that they were using before the ETS. But the Eastern Europe not. So in Eastern Europe we had that the treated the routes affected by the ETS, no, so Poland, Romania, and so on, they have worse planes than the countries not affected by the ETS, no? Like for example,
I guess the average fleet age of the fleet should be relatively high in a sense, right?
Yeah. And this also may explain what we find, no? At the end, we take the overall sample, we have an effect in terms of emissions intensity of 2%, but the effect is concentrated in the eastern area, no? So really we can say that if we are in places where they are really in the border of the technological in the limits of the technological frontier, we are not going to find really significant effects. No? If you are using worse planes and you have a scope to improve the efficiency in the aircraft fleet, the results are important. No?
I do believe this is another very important result, because similar to what we saw with network and low-cost carriers before, and now we have a period where the prices were quite substantial, right? But then still, you see that before we compare different airline business models, now we compare airlines with coming from different regions, or aviation markets different regions of aviation markets within Europe, and you see this is again, that the response to the European emission trading scheme is very different depending on whether you're looking at Eastern European or Western European market. And one could say, oh, it works in Eastern European, but it doesn't work in Western Europe. But I don't think this is the right way of putting this. This is the kind of flexibility that we like from market mechanisms. Western European, they have already quite advanced technology. Let's say, let's say they have already the average.
They are already using the better planes.
So the fleet is already quite modern. Eastern Europe perhaps not as modern, and therefore you have more catching up. You observe more catching up in Eastern European market, whereas in Western European market, and that's a good thing. This is how it's supposed to be, because this is efficient without sacrificing on the climate goals, because the climate effect is determined by the total number of emissions, and this is determined by the total number of certificates, and the total number of certificates is just given. So that is something, but there is this flexibility, and this kind of is something that really helps us to achieve the climate goals efficiently, in a sense, at the lowest possible cost. So I think this is a good finding. It's a very good finding, sort of, which illustrates really the strength of market mechanisms.
Yeah, I agree. And then I move to the next slide, where I show the parallel trends. Always in this kind of analysis, you need to show that there is parallel trends, because if not, you cannot talk about causality, Mm-hmm. And then I move to the next slide, and then we also analyze the issue of what explains the improvement in the emissions intensity, that is particularly driven by the Eastern Europe. And we find that evidence that, yes, the ETS is promoting the use of or more fuel-efficient aircraft,
Right.
Here, the definition of fuel efficient is always in relation to the mean, If you have aircraft that have less emissions intensity over the mean sample, we are coded this as fuel efficient aircraft. We also look at the year, the aircraft vintage, and the year of the first introduction of the aircraft, and we find also similar results. So it seems that the ETS is promoting the use of better aircraft. It also promotes the use of winglets. In fact, the effect is stronger for winglets. It has accelerated the use of winglets. That was something that in 2010, at the beginning of the sample of the year that we consider here, anyone was using winglets, and it seems that the ETS has accelerated this. Later in the next slide, we also have this, the trends also, the pre-trends works well, So, and then I move to the next slide, and then I look at the issue of the effect of the ETS on tourist destinations, That here we could interpret this in two different ways. We could interpret it as which is the effectiveness of the ETS on tourist destinations, or we could also analyze if there is some kind of carbon leakage, or tourist carbon leakage, And then here, one thing with the tourist destinations, and also another thing that we do here is that we consider different variables. We consider passengers, emissions, seats, flights. So we consider a quite complete set of dependent variables. The period is from.
It's also quite a long period, right? I mean,
it's a long period. 2010, 2022. Of course,
including COVID.
Yes, here always you have to make, in aviation, I think it's now compulsory, some robustness checks avoiding the 2020, 2021, because the COVID alters everything. So we always make this kind of analysis. And then here the sample is different, because we have the original airports from the European Economic Area, and the destinations are tourist places in Europe, in North and West Africa, and the Middle East. We also have non-stop and one-stop flights. So we have the threatened routes will be also, as in the previous analysis, routes within the European Economic Area, and the control routes will be flights from the European Economic Area to non-European economic areas. And also here, one thing is that the ETS until 2024, that now has changed, what they are called outermost regions, like Azores, Canary Islands, and Madeira, they were not affected by ETS. So I think they are very good control routes because they are from the European Economic Area, but they are not affected by ETS. No?
Right.
And well, we also produce.
And it has the reason why they are not affected by the ETS has nothing to do with the ETS. It's just something that is exogenous, right? There's some factor that is. I think this is something that is very important.
It's a decision of the European Union of benefiting, giving some privilege to these areas, but it's not for the ETS, yes.
Yeah, but it's not because of the ETS, right? Because if they would say, they are having lots of emissions, and therefore we don't add them to the EU ETS. No, that's not the point. It is some reasons that have nothing to do with the EU ETS, and this is what makes it exogenous and a very good control.
And in fact, from 2024, they have entered to the ETS, no? So, and well, we also produce this entropy balance and the matched sample, no? And here, what we find is we don't have an effect on passengers, so it doesn't seem that again, with my example of myself, I'm in Barcelona and I have to decide if I go to Greece or Turkey. It doesn't seem that the potential higher fares of going to Greece has not altered my decision, no? Perhaps because we just not take into account the cost of the flight when we decide we are going for the vacations, no? But in any case, we don't have an effect, no? And we have the effect in terms of emissions, no? As a 7% effect, no? We have a stronger effect in terms of flights.
Which means emissions, can I just for clarifications. So this is the emissions on intra-European flights.
As compared to, yes.
Right. And I think something important to highlight again is that some people may be saying, this means that this would have improved our climate goals. But the point is, it hasn't. Because if aviation on inter-European markets uses less emission certificates, it means that they will be used by others, and the total emissions are basically unaffected by this. I think this is an important aspect to highlight, which has again to do with the workings of the emission trading scheme.
Yes, I agree. So that's why here it's. In terms of the interpretation, you could see it in two ways, no? Here, looking at the effectiveness, no? So really, the airline react to the ETS by reducing flights and so on, no? But we could also see it in the other way, no? So you are reducing emissions in the ETS routes, no? But at the expenses of the increases in the non-ETS routes, no?
Yeah, but this is again the flexibility. It means that reducing emissions on, serving tourist destinations is a way of abating greenhouse gas emissions, which is cheap relative to other ways of abating greenhouse gas emissions. And market mechanisms like the EU emission trading scheme allows for these kind of ways of handling emissions and without affecting the achievement of the climate goals. It means that aviation within the European area reduces less greenhouse gas emissions. It doesn't mean that we are closer to protecting the climate because the total emissions are still unaffected by what happens in the aviation industry. I think this is another pretty important aspect that actually we highlighted in some previous podcasts, also with Steph Proust. He's always, very keen in making that point, and also when it comes to intermodal competition, if people would say, let's say, aviation passengers within when they're doing inter-European travels, move to high-speed rail, and this would be the hopes may be that this would be reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but the effective, all are covered by the emission trading scheme, and the total effect on emissions is just zero because the total emissions are not affected by the mode that you're taking on inter-European trips, so to say. Anyway, this is another
yes,
example.
and the other result that we can infer from here, and the descriptive evidence support this, that there has not been a decrease in the tourism attractiveness of the European destinations because there is not an effect on passengers, no? And as we have less seats but not less passengers, we have an increase in the load factor, no? Which is an increase in the efficiency of the airline operations, no? And the other thing is that we have a stronger effect on flights than on seats. So there has been also an increase in the size of the aircraft, no? That is from a theoretical point of view, is what we should expect, no? So there is a paper of Bruckner and Zhang, no, that they provide a theoretical prediction on this line, no. So overall, we also provide some additional positive outcomes of the ETS, no. This increase in the efficiency of the airline operations, no.
Right.
And then I move to the next slide. This is also the parallel trends, no, that in general works well, no. And now I'm going to the issue more where the effects of the ETS are not so positive. That is the issue of the hub carbon leakage. And here we have one-stop routings. So here we are, there is one stop, no? It's the example of before. I go from Barcelona to Bangkok through Dubai, no? So there is one stop. And here data is from 2010 to 2023, so it's even a longer period. And we have routes from Europe to Asia and North America. And here, as with this sample, it's complicated to have information on covariates, no? We apply high dimensional fixed effects, no? That we are controlling for everything, not just the invariable, the observables that are time invariant, but the observables that are time variant, no? In terms of the origin airport, the destination airport, the airline, and so on, no? And here what we do is we compare the passenger flows, no? The number of passengers in routes affected by the ETS, and in this case is when the hub or the transfer airport it's in the European Economic Area, no, with the control group that here are when the transfer airport is not in the European Economic Area, no, as the example that I said before, no, in the treatment group we have a route the routing is Barcelona, Helsinki, Bangkok, and the control group is the route Barcelona, Dubai, Bangkok. Okay, so we have also the diff and diff, the same analysis. No? And here the main variable of the analysis is the allowance price, no? Because we have here a longer period and we have higher variability in terms of the price of the certificates, no? And then I move to the next slide, and then what we have is that there is an effect. So really there is, and here the focus is on network airlines, no? And we have there is a reduction of passengers flows in routes affected by DTS as compared to routes not affected by DTS, no? So here, this may provide some evidence of the. So I think this happens also for if we focus on Asia or we focus on North America, no. And then we also split the sample.
How does this? Can you just to clarify? How does? Okay, so what you basically say is, there are some routes that are affected by ETS, and there will be less traffic. This is what we would expect. But how is this evidence for leakage? Because leakage would mean that we have less traffic here, but more traffic where it's not where the ETS does not apply, and therefore the climate effect, basically the efficient that sort of reduces the effectiveness of these climate policies, and that's something that we have we should be concerned about. How to make that
The
connection?
idea here also is to split the sample, no? We split the sample and we focus on one sample where there is real competition, no? So I can go, the example of before, no? I can go through to Bangkok, through Helsinki or through Dubai, no? So there is competition, no? Mm-hmm. And we also focus on a sample where there is no real competition. So really you can go through an ETS airport or not. So there is not really...
I see. Okay. So basically you have different samples. There are some substitutes. Basically what you mean with competition is basically there are some alternative routes that would not be covered by ETS. And then there are some routes where there are no alternative routes. And now you compare those and then you look again at the difference in the difference. And then you find, okay, so then...
similar. So I think we find effects in both types of samples. So finally is this, no? That how to interpret the interpretation of the results here are tricky because here the indirect effects are more evident, no? On the one hand, we can say that there is we find evidence of the effectiveness of the ETS in the long haul segment of the market, no? So previous studies have focused on the short haul segment of the market, and here we have some evidence of effectiveness in the long haul market. But we could also say that there is some evidence that have carbon leakage, no? That can be the increase of cost in the ETS hubs have implied a shift from.
So where do you? How do you? This is something where I struggle a little bit in seeing.
Yes, it's not easy to really. So if we go to the descriptive evidence, it seems that. So the trend is, if we go to the descriptive, is that there is a trend to grow in both sides. So from the ETS routes and the non-ETS routes, no? But the increase has been higher in the non-ETS routes, no? So it seems that the demand in the increase of the market, the demand growth, the overall demand growth in the market has been captured more by the Asian and the North American airlines.
So the markets have been dynamic, which is what we know from aviation markets, and that's also why we know we need to do something in terms of climate, because there is a climate impact. We also you also mentioned one of the slides, but we didn't really touch it, is the non-CO2 emissions. So there are climate effects. The market is dynamic. It's growing. So we need to do something. And what you find is basically that it's growing, but less in those long haul markets that are sort of where the that are partly or covered by the emission trading scheme. And that is sort of indicating that, it's a little bit unclear, right? Because I think if you would find that the alternative routes would be increasing more because some of the alternatives are covered by ETS, then I think that would be an indication for a leakage, because basically if you take away the emission trading scheme, there is no leakage. There would be growth, but maybe at the emission trading scheme covered routes, but the growth would be less substantial. Then I think that would be a really nice indication for how this leakage effect. So is this what you find, or?
Yeah, I think at the end, my impression is that there are a mix of effects here. No, so there is a mix of effectiveness and this mix of a bit worsening of the competitive conditions of the European airlines, no? A bit, no? So I think the two things are mixed. But in any case, I think one interesting result of this paper, no, is that here we are talking about long-haul flights, no, and connecting flights, no, and we know that in this arena, in this market, is very important the issue of the alliances. Right. And especially when we look at the traffic from Europe to North America, the joint ventures dominate the market, no? And joint ventures, and here, that is the strongest level of
joint ventures. Is this joint ventures? Is what
joint
you're
ventures,
saying?
yes. Joint ventures, okay. Yes. The joint ventures at the end implies sharing of revenues and in some cases sharing of costs, no? So, given
maybe I should just highlight. Now we are actually. This is another big topic, and we can have many podcasts on airline talking about airline alliances. But one of the important issues is like bilateral agreements. So if some airlines, they are not allowed to serve certain connections because they are not allowed to fly to certain places in let's say in the US or in Europe, and therefore they collaborate. And this is one of the important features of alliances, where they have these kind of collaborations, and then they are even allowed to collaborate in terms of pricing and a lot of things. And that is sort of what you're saying right now, that this is
and in this case, also what we could expect is that this increased cost for the European airlines are shared with the partner airlines, no? And if this is the case, then there will be a mitigation of the effect of the ETS, no? And it's, in fact, is what we found, no? Especially for North America. For North America, the effect of the ETS get diluted. If we are looking at routes that are affected by the joint ventures, we don't have an effect, no? In the Asia, that the joint ventures are less, probably are not so deep.
But you could also say it's like, okay, so these long haul North Atlantic routes are sort of what we observe in Western European market, or for network carriers, where you have the emission trading scheme, and in order to there are some extra costs, but reducing the greenhouse gas emissions is still too expensive compared to what you have to pay for the emission certificates. And therefore, you don't basically reduce emissions. And that's also okay in a sense, right?
Yeah, you are sharing. So at least in terms of what will be my concern here, no, that this is what is happening to the competitiveness of the European airlines, no? If really it's harming, no, the European airlines, no. But if you are engaged in partnerships with non-European airlines, or all this potential negative effect in terms of competitiveness get diluted, because finally you are sharing the extra cost, no? And at the end, you probably perhaps you're.
But there are lots of factors. You could also share the cost of improving fuel efficiency by investing into newer aircraft. So yes. I think there are, right? I mean, this is again, I think this is a big topic, and not something that we can discover sort of in all detail.
I think it's one of the big topics that is still, there is much work that can be done here, no? I think it's very interesting, because also with the CORSIA, this is also going to be interesting, no? Because the CORSIA is going to affect international flights, that there is a lot of alliances here, no? And I think this connection between alliances and environmental policies, I think it's a very interesting area of analysis.
I think this is also interesting for other reasons which we haven't discussed until now, which is another important feature when it comes to European climate policies. And this is the fuel policies, right? Refuel EU Aviation, which is actually covering the part of the extra-European sort of flights that go out from Europe and to other places compared to Europe, because it basically depends on the aircraft whenever they fuel in Europe at European airports, they have to have a certain share of green fuels, or sustainable aviation fuels in the mix. And they can also not fuel. They are supposed to fuel. There is also a limitation on that. So, and that is, this kind of policy is something that I feel is helping with the leakage effect, because maybe we don't capture those flights. They are not well captured by the emission trading scheme, but they are captured by these fuel policies, Refuel EU Aviation. And I feel there's a lot of criticism with respect to Refuel EU Aviation when it comes to, it's not a market mechanism, right? It's like we sort of force airlines to use a certain amount of sustainable aviation fuel, which is very expensive. But the point is that the reach is sort of broader, and the share of extra-European flights is actually quite high. I think it's maybe 50% or so. It's like real. It's a very substantial number. It's not just 5% or so, but it's a almost half. So having this, sort of effect on having a policy in place that does not only cover European domestic flights, but also flights that are going beyond European, other flights that are not European domestic flights, is actually something that really can contribute to helping.
In terms of total emissions, it's clear that so it's I think in fact in the slide I had one. If we go to the short haul flights that are less than 300, this is the slide 5. They represent short haul flights are less than 350 miles. I think I made this distinction. So they represent 25% of flights and 5% of emissions. If you go to the long haul flights, they represent a similar level of flights, 28% and almost 70% of total emissions. So the big problem is in the long haul flights, because of course the emissions depends on the distance,
Of course, yeah.
It's also true that in the short haul flights there are options, because you could go by train, or even by bus, In long haul flights there is not another option, and the emissions intensity are lower, but on the overall impact. The overall climate impact of aviation, the long haul flights, really we have to act here if we really want to reduce the emissions of the.
And I think this is also something highlighting the importance of these leakage effects, because these leakage effects will mainly be in long haul markets, and EU ETS is not a very good. The way it is designed right now is not really capturing those flights, but refuel aviation, the fuel policies do, and that's a good thing. And on top of this, actually, these fuel policies have another positive effect, which is related to these non-CO2 emissions. So aircraft create these clouds in the sky, so-called contrails, condensation trails, contrails, and they are contributing quite substantial to the to have a very strong climate impact, which is comparable to the greenhouse gas emissions. And the emission trading scheme doesn't cover those non-CO2 emissions, but the fuel policy
is planned to do it. There is the plan to do it,
but it's not done, right? I mean, there is some monitoring policy, but it's not part of the emission trading scheme yet. But just one short sentence. The fuel policies do indirectly, because sustainable aviation fuel is not only reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also the non-CO2 effects. So there are. That is something that I feel it's not a market mechanism, but it has some benefits that the emission trading scheme doesn't have.
No, and also I think there is the European Union is going to devote an important part of the revenues of the ETS, to subsidize the green fuels, when there is to compensate to some extent the increased cost that the green fuels implies in relation to the
there is a budget like this that I was talking. We had another podcast, and that was one of the issues. But I feel that comparatively speaking, I think it's like €1 billion or something. But comparatively speaking, the amount that is available for compensating airlines for the use of sustainable aviation fuel is still not so high compared to the cost that they will have. So this is a big discussion. This is a big discussion when it comes to climate policies in the Europe versus US, right? Where people say, Europe is always like, very cost intensive for the aviation industry, whereas in the US, pre-Trump, sort of, there was the issue about, they use much more subsidies. But that's another big discussion. But
because at the end is that in Europe we devote the subsidies to other issues, no, to the more social welfare and so on, no, and in US here we have preferred to use the subsidies for other areas, and to address the climate goals, we have decided to increase the cost, no? But I think it makes sense, eh?
Yeah. All right. I think actually we covered a lot of material. Did we forget something important?
No, I don't think so.
I think, when I think about, I was thinking, okay, what could be the main lessons from this discussion? I came up with like 4 points that I really think that what the EU does, the emission trading scheme and also the fuel policies, they definitely are effective in terms of contributing to protecting the climate in terms of controlling greenhouse gas emissions and even non-CO2 emissions to a certain extent. So I think that's a good thing. And I think what especially the emission trading scheme, what it does, it is a market mechanism which, and you gave a lot of examples for this, is a flexible mechanism. The emission trading scheme, the total emissions are fixed by the number of certificates, but who uses them depends on how much they are, how expensive are the abatement costs. And what you said, you give a lot of examples. Oh, maybe for network carriers, more expensive, and for low-cost carriers, so low-cost carriers reduce more greenhouse gas emissions. Maybe in Eastern Europe, there is, better opportunity to upgrade the aircraft efficiency, and therefore you see a bigger effect on Eastern European aviation compared to Western European aviation. So I think this is a very, this is what we want, right? I think there was another third point, which I don't remember right now. But there is another important issue, is that something that, such as the EU emission trading scheme, is leakage. That is something that, even though it helps contributing to the emission trading scheme, helps controlling the emissions within the European area, that may, the fact that we do this may lead to some higher emissions elsewhere. But this is where we have some other policies, such as fuel policies, which can sort of help also mitigate these kind of effects.
Yes, because aviation is particularly affected by the carbon leakage things. No? It's particularly vulnerable. No?